Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We're back in session. We are on board discussion regarding overall presentations. But before we do that, I see we have a department head available, 2 of them, maybe 3. Is there any comments by staff at this time before we go into discussion and deliberation on the board?
Mr. Chair, honorable members of the board, Leslie Davis, County Assessor. Thank you for the opportunity to talk. I really wasn't going to take the opportunity, but you asked, and no self-respecting politician ever stays away from a microphone. Like so many of my colleagues, I was watching you this morning and in the audience yesterday afternoon. So I heard when Sam Leach told you that he apologized for being angry, but he felt the need to stand up for his staff. And I listened as the captain at the sheriff's office said to you, hey, maybe you need to look an across the board cut. So let's talk a little bit about that for a moment, if we might. And Gary, you can sit back because you've heard most of this before. An across the board cut of 12% would reduce my office budget by about $161,000. I can tell you that's all coming out of staff. I am not awash in paper clips and post-it notes. The service and supplies budget has a little bit that might be cut, but it sure as heck isn't going to get to $161,000. The majority of my service and supplies budget is a contract that we have with a vendor that I'm the one responsible to pay for. So it's people, and it's always going to be people. It's pretty short-sighted, I think, when you talk about reducing people in the general government ranks because you want to fund public safety. The fact of the matter is the folks that work in public safety don't come to work every day because they love it. They come to work every day because they expect a paycheck, which means somebody better be working in payroll in the auditor's office, and somebody better be working in HR making sure they're in the payroll system in the first place. It means somebody in my office better be out there doing their job so we can close an assessment roll so that 35% of your general fund dollars and most of your discretionary dollars are being produced by my department and collected by the tax collector's office. It's super easy to say, let's do 12% across the board. It is not super easy to start telling those people across the desk from you that they're out of work. I just hope that you remember where the money's coming from eventually. And that money is coming from those of us in general government finance offices making that money. When Vicki stood up and said, taxpayers want their tax dollars going to public safety, I don't think anyone in my office would argue with her. But I think what we would say to you is this: those tax dollars don't come in if a bill doesn't go out. A bill doesn't go out unless somebody in my office and someone in the tax collector's office is doing their job. So what happens if I cut those 3 positions? Because I'll tell you I will cut appraisers at this point since I don't have anybody in those jobs. And I don't have anybody in those jobs for a number of reasons that we won't go into. But if I start cutting appraisers, I can guarantee you that you will start to see negatives in future years. You won't see it for next year because next year's assessment roll is just about done. And it's just about done with 3,500 events that have not been valued. That is the work equivalent of 3.5 appraisers. Again, I'm down 3, I'm gonna stay down 3. Next year, I will make the decision not to value boats, not to value planes, not to value business property. In other words, Gary, not to do the unsecured roll. And that means the line item you have in the sheriff's office budget, the $30,800 matching fund for their boating and waterways grant that they use from the money generated off of boat assessments, won't be there next year. And it means a whole lot of other money won't be there next year. So I implore you, just as public safety has implored you, I implore you to think about those departments who are toiling away quietly, doing a job that nobody really loves, but we care deeply about providing, so that you have those dollars to spend in those areas where you need to spend it. I don't question you need to spend it, but I think you need to realize where that money's coming from and how hard my staff is working to get those dollars to you to spend. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Any other staff member wish to present? I'm sorry, what?
Come up to the microphone.
Yeah,
We want to hear this on TV.
we're old.
What Leslie just said, I basically said ditto.
Okay, all right, I'm sorry.
Unfortunately, the general service departments are a necessary evil, whether it's county council or the auditor controller's office or the assessor or the tax collector administration. We're sitting here working to try to figure out how to get from point A to point B. So I've been here long enough where we've done the 12% across the board reduction, the 5%, the 10%. One year, I think we did 3 or 4 exercises of a multitude of all of those. And for our departments, because we are very small in terms of the overall general fund contribution, it just means layoffs. That's what it means to us. So I would hope that this board and this administration can look at kind of more of a priority based budgeting, but understanding that these are difficult decisions, and whatever the decision is going to be, we'll just have to support that, but understand what the consequences are in either direction that you go.
Thank you, Ms. Callen.
Barbara Uke, District Attorney. I absolutely value the work that is behind the scenes that the Central Service Departments do. I just wanted to let you know as well that a 12% cut would also be layoffs to my office. I haven't penciled it out because we were not asked to do that exercise. In prior years, we have had to prepare 2 to 3 models of budgets depending on different scenarios. So we certainly could do that if that was requested, but I would anticipate that a 12% cut to my office would be layoffs. I did want to clarify and address something that the auditor brought up earlier about the use of designated funds. I have 2 main designated funds. One is the asset forfeiture fund and one is the environmental fund, and I would take exception to her statement that department heads are not using them appropriately. I believe my department is. I don't know if it was just a broad stroke statement, but I have been using them appropriately. We do use them to enhance our function. That's specifically with the asset forfeiture fund, for instance. You really can't use it for bodies, for people. You have to use it for enhancing law enforcement, and we used it this year. For $5,000 of it, we used for an iSubpoena product to go paperless for our subpoenas for law enforcement. We should realize some actual hard savings, and we certainly are going to realize soft savings as well in terms of time, staff time, time for law enforcement agencies. The Sheriff's Office, Angels Camp, CHP will be realizing a lot of, they will be realizing some savings, I believe, in paper and overtime potentially because of the process that we've can use with the iSubpoena product. So we do use our funds. We use them appropriately. We use them within the rules. We do access them wherever we can. We do right now have about $54,000 in our environmental fund. Those are restricted funds. I do use a small portion of that for staff time, for the fish and game cases and whatever cases we are doing in-house. I do not give that money to CDAA. They have not asked for it. You know, maybe they would for all the work they are doing for us for free. And if we were able to go forward with maybe the consumer protection unit, which is also an environmental unit, maybe the use of that funds would be appropriate for that type of project. It is only $54,000, however. That does not go very far, but if there were a legitimate means use for those funds, I certainly would seek to use them to continue using my designated funds appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you, District Attorney York. Any other staff member wish to present? Okay, seeing that we allowed that in fairness and as exercising my option as chair, I'm going to open up public comment to anybody that would like to address the board that hasn't addressed the board yet on the budget issue. Seeing no one, we'll bring it back to the board for discussion, deliberation. Who would like to go first? Let's not all jump up at once. Okay. There is no discussion or deliberation on this issue? Okay.
Excuse me, I'll start just to jump into the thing. Maybe start discussions. Give me just a second here. First off, during the break, we had a conversation. I had a conversation with the CAO, and I had a conversation with the sheriff on some of the things that were discussed and what's in this proposed budget as far as the sheriff's office. The sheriff presented to us 10 positions. I think the CAO may be speaking to that shortly, what the outcome of some of that was, but I believe that the sheriff is requesting that myself, the Supervisor Mills, the CAO, Jim Macedo, and the sheriff himself meet on Monday to discuss some of the items in his budget that they're willing to discuss with us to come to an agreement to balance the budget in his department. I would be asking...
Supervisor Topolny, could I have you speak into the microphone for us?
Sorry.
We're fading off.
Asking for us to meet and bring to this board from that meeting on Monday some of the things that we would discuss to balance his budget. Again, alluding back to his presentation, the DA's presentation, and probation's presentation on what is proposed in our documents and the shortfalls that are proposed that on the bottom line of freezing positions are not in line with what the bottom line is in the CAO's budget outline here of 3.3 million. I think it's much more than that, which would be a bigger gap that we would be trying to fill between now and September. However, I think part of the equation has to do with the sheriff and his budget and what can be done to bring it more in line to a balanced budget with him.
Can you repeat the part about the difference in the bottom line? I'm sorry, Gary.
Could I have your...
The CAO's projection, if you look on his page 11, he has forecasts on what the amounts in specific departments, if we froze what he's asking, all the positions and extra hires. Under the sheriff's, he's saying that it would be $1.4 million that would be saved. The sheriff presented his PowerPoint and his thing to us saying that the positions that are described, that were prescribed in this deduction are not all valid. Some of them are grant positions, some of them are being paid for by urgency ordinance, and so it's not going to equate this to this amount. Bottom line, the DA said, and she has presented us with her PowerPoint, that $483,965 is not an adequate amount either, because under her equations that there's only a $40,000 savings to the positions that were outlined in her budget. So there's a deficit there of another $400,000. And the probation officer, Sam, when he presented his, he was saying two of the positions don't even exist. So if you put all that into the equation, I'm thinking we're closer to a $9 million deficit than what is being talked about, presented to us in this CAO's budget book. However, I think some of it can be rectified with some of the sheriff's office, if we can sit down and talk to him and go through this and then present to the board out of this meeting what we've came to agreement with on some of these positions to actually lower this $1.46 million deficit.
Thank you,
To
Supervisor.
get it to an adequate balance.
Do you have how much you're talking about?
Jack, turn.
I'd be guesstimating at this time. I really can't put that forward. I'm just looking at some of the numbers that he's presented and some of the ideas that came forward. I had met with Rick on Monday, one-on-one for a while, but it could be anywhere from 400,000 to 600,000, 500,000 maybe.
In reduction of that line there, the sheriff's under salaries,
Correct. Instead of inflating that, reducing that.
it'd be reduced to about $1 million.
Further comments? Supervisor Mills?
Well, I think again, here we're driving to that position control list discussion with this, and it is a very broad brush approach. We can look at these positions individually and look at the numbers on a total, but we are not looking at all of the other pieces of having that particular position filled, unfilled, budgeted, not budgeted, whatever it might be, the length of time, benefit packages. There's a whole lot of other things that go into it. So I think if we start with the Sheriff's Department, which seems to be the most important and most willing to have that discussion, it could go from there out to the rest of the departments as we gain a clearer understanding of each position. And I think to the auditor's discussion about whether there's parity between the position control list and the actual work being performed, we can have those discussions included as well. So there's a lot to this, a lot of moving parts, but we've got to start somewhere, and let's start with one is most obvious.
Okay. Thank you, Supervisor Mills.
And I think that's great, but it increases, as Gary pointed out, it increases the hole in our budget, or because we're taking out what salary savings would be, right? We're making that number smaller.
Well, I misspoke because I meant to say that it would affect the gap that we have that was unforeseen in this projection. It would reduce that gap.
Still have a big gap.
We still have a big gap, but we're looking at trying to reduce that. And I think if we can come to an agreement that we could reduce somewhat of the gap, possibly in line, possibly even more than what's projected here in this CAO's presentation.
CEO Lutz, are you in agreement with this?
I am. I also briefly at lunch had a conversation with the sheriff about getting together. I think it would be beneficial, and I think this is part of what I'm hoping for on a larger scale as we get into July and August, of sitting down with departments, whether that means an ad hoc committee, which I would suggest maybe the board wants to have a budget ad hoc committee. Certainly, if we're going to have two board members meeting with the sheriff, we would probably want to say we'll do an ad hoc committee for that purpose, but then it will be up to the board on whether you want to extend that for this entire process through July and August to go through departmental budgets.
Okay. Well, County Council, number one, can we form this ad hoc committee? Number two, would we have to form that for all departments that wish to discuss this issue?
Certainly, if the board wished to create an ad hoc committee, you would have to be very specific as to what that would include, whether it just be for the sheriff or all departments. That would be in the board's discretion. However, I would remind the board that we have to have an adopted budget by the 30th. So this ad hoc committee would be beyond, it would be approving the budget, moving on for future discussions for a final budget.
Thank you, Council. Supervisor Tofinelli, seeing you brought this issue up, would you like to poll the board on the ad hoc committee for the Sheriff's Department or for the entire departments in the county? How would you like to word that?
I would just like to pull the board on just this meeting with the sheriff.
Okay.
And then we can agendize or talk about it at our next meeting to go forward between July 1st and September, when the final budget comes, to bring, discuss an ad hoc committee to be formed to discuss with other department heads. Because I don't think there's enough time between now and when we need to adopt this budget.
Okay.
But certainly with the sheriff.
So as I understand it, you're requesting a poll of the board to form an ad hoc committee just with the Sheriff's Department at this time to discuss budget item issues.
Correct.
Is that correct, Council?
I just want to make sure that it's clear that the direction can be to create an ad hoc committee. I would recommend the actual creation be an agendized item, just for clarity. So the public, everyone has the opportunity to know that it's coming forward for consideration and give them an opportunity to comment on the creation of this ad hoc committee. That could certainly be something that could be agendized on the 20th, since we'll be back here next Tuesday for the formal creation of it.
If I could add, though, a complicating factor is timing is critical here. Looking at availability of supervisor time and sheriff's time, we were trying to look at Monday, which would be before the next board meeting.
Maybe, go ahead, Gary.
Do we actually need a ad hoc committee to just have two supervisors meet in the CAO to meet with the sheriff on this? We don't actually even need to form an ad hoc committee for that.
That's where I was going.
But we can poll the board to see if they would like to agree.
The purpose of an ad hoc committee is for a very specific issue. If it's a matter of, similarly, we've done in the past where two board members elected to assist staff through an issue, that's something very different than forming an ad hoc committee moving forward with deadlines, reporting back, things of that nature. In this situation, especially considering the timeframes, CAO Lutz indicated not having a quorum, but two supervisors assist him in discussions between now and the 30th, that would certainly be appropriate. It would not be a violation of the Brown Act as long as there's only two that are working with him.
And with them, it would seem logical that, if Dennis and Gary want to meet with the sheriff and the CAO to see what they can figure out, I don't think that's a problem at all. I would like to, perhaps you gentlemen could report back to us on Tuesday and say, hey, look, we found a bunch of money, or we pounded sand. It's worth a try.
We can certainly do that.
Does that require agendizing?
If it's going to be reporting out at a board meeting, I would recommend that we go ahead and agendize an item so that there can be a full discussion without there being any Brown Act implications.
Okay, great. Staff, can we get that agendized by that time?
I was looking over at the clerk to make sure she was okay with that, but yes, we can.
We could just, perhaps we could just agendize it as budget update, because it's got to be part of the bigger picture.
Well, and that's what I was going to say, is the 27th, we will be bringing back an actual budget recommendation based on what the board requests today. So we are already going to have on the 27th the recommended budget and asking the board to adopt it at that point.
We would have to adopt it at that point.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, the board will have to adopt it at that date, I should add.
all right, they'll have to adopt that day?
So just for
I
clarification,
would be leaning towards a meeting on Monday, but reporting out on the 20th to give us that 7-day lead time, to be exact, because we do have to approve on the 27th. Comments on that?
Yeah,
Can we do that? Would that be we can take a poll of the board, if that would be acceptable? We'll start with Supervisor Tofinelli.
yes.
Supervisor Garamendi?
Could you clarify what we're voting on?
To have a meeting of Supervisor Mills, Supervisor Tofinelli to meet with the sheriff and the CAO to discuss possible reduction of budget proposal to be reported out to the Board of Supervisors on the Tuesday meeting of the 20th.
Sure. Yes.
Okay. Supervisor Mills?
Yes.
And Supervisor Chair says yes also. So let's go ahead on that pretense and get that done.
Watch it.
Good forth.
Is there any other discussion by the board?
Thank you so much.
Good forth.
I think, Chair, I don't know if this is where we want to kind of make an overview, or do we want to do that here, or?
Yeah.
You can do anything you want.
You do anything you want, your suggestions.
Within reason.
Open to the board on what your suggestions are to present in this budget.
Yes, and that's really where I would like to go. I don't want to really drag this out too far and make everybody stay till 4 o'clock. It would be better, have been better, of course, to have held a retreat and set our priorities as a board with the 4 new members that we've had here before beginning this budget process. That wasn't possible with a new CAO coming on board. I think he did a spectacular job with the information he had, and the methods of gathering information were challenging all by themselves. Amazing. But this is the start of a priority-based budgeting system, and from this we can begin to set action plans to drive our focus to those most important services that we deliver to our residents. Hello. I'm not sure that I would call this current budget zero-based budgeting. I did mention to the CAO that I thought it was more of a dartboard approach. I don't think that there's a whole lot in here that, when I'm looking at it, saying, I don't know if you can see mine here, but there's so many feathers in it, it could fly. It just simply, there's so many questions that are left unanswered. So please keep in mind that this is a preliminary budget. It's not a final budget. It's the beginning of the negotiating process, the discussion process. It's not the end. To that end, I think we should derive our policies to support our goals, and this can come in the form of a strategic management plan, which I'm not able to find currently that we're operating under any type. To go through this process every year and then have the board review the budget at mid-year, I don't think is a good long-term strategy to ensure that we're meeting expectations. I think several supervisors need to be on some type of finance committee working with the CAO and the department heads and try to be innovative in achieving alignment with stated goals of the budget and working on a monthly initially and then probably bi-monthly review using spreadsheets to ensure we're tracking and trending correctly. Capital improvement plans should be structured to ensure we're capable of replacing capital items at the time they need to be replaced. This requires reserve accounts and money set aside in each budget cycle so we can amortize life cycles. This should not be a reactive approach to capital needs, whether it be infrastructure or vehicles. I think that Gatsby 54 policy discussion, when I first looked at this budget, I'm looking to say, where's the designated funds list? I mean, it was another one of those things that I felt was critical, but it was missing. The designated fund list, along with a position control list, I think are integral parts of having a clear view of a total budget, and I notice you're moving away from me.
Getting out of line.
This board has not yet touched on reserve funds and any discussions surrounding that, whether they're designated, earmarked, restricted, encumbered, or other. The issue of having 90-day operating reserves, establishing reserve accounts for projects, even talking about the investment portfolio, and other funds that do play a part in our cash flow needs. We've talked about we haven't talked yet about debt service ratios. In fact, we haven't talked about debt service at all, and yet it is a part of our budget. I think marijuana needs to be a line item of its own in all budgets. When the Sheriff's Department has an activity that turns from a regular response to a marijuana response, and those costs need to be tracked separately. We still have no idea on the overall cost of services in our county over the past years, which has stressed staff's ability to provide the basic services they were hired to do. And to that end, I think the OES needs to come into it, the admin office. I'll give you a caveat to this, and I'm very pleased to tell you that the first director of Cal OES, his name was Kim Zagaris, personally trained me in OES over a quarter century ago. And ICS and OES are something that I am familiar with. The reason I think for that is best stated in how we have overburdened public works with all the details of the recovery process. And recovery under OES is 80% of the work, at least, and it needs an administrative oversight, a project coordination, and a finance structure, and I think that the OIG report was very critical to us for that. I think the CAO needs to be the hub for budgets and ensuring that those goals are created within the budget are met, but the board needs to provide the direction to the CAO so that he can be tasked with carrying out the directions and the policy that this board has set. And that is my comments for now.
Thank you, Supervisor Mills. Any further comments by the board? Supervisor Garamendi?
Not so much a comment, but I think to Supervisor Mills' point, we should start talking. I'm assuming now we're going to start going through this tab by tab, talk about what our policy is. we're not just gonna move OES without talking about it, so I say let's dive in. Here it comes, of course.
Okay. Supervisor Tofinelli?
Well, I do have a couple things. I agree with Supervisor Mills on that marijuana should be a separate line item. I totally agree on that. It's too difficult trying to track and find out right now from the sheriff exactly what's being expended and what's not from general fund and what's being tagged. I totally agree on that. So we can find out exactly what general funds are going to those positions versus coming out of the urgency ordinance funds. Also, I touched on it earlier, and I think the CAO touched on it earlier, that I was proposing an economic and community development manager position that would be, well, I'll give you the definition, and I want to thank Judy for helping me with this. And she was very gracious in helping me do the research and putting this thing together, and including the salary range. So thank you so much, in your department, to everybody that worked on it. The definition, and I got to tell you that doing the research on this thing, that we have been lacking in this county for a lot of years, but not having this position. Many other counties and many other cities or that are incorporated have a position that if not this exact definition heading, is in general the same type of position. And the surrounding counties have boomed. Everybody looks and says Amador and Tuolumne are going way past us in their developments. Everybody's driving over there to do business. And they are surrounding areas that have utilized this type of thing in this position. So let me read the definition. Economic and Community Development Manager of Calaveras County, under general direction, manages the administrative department's economic and community development functions and directs programs to achieve the departmental missions, implements and maintains the economic development strategic plan, which I'm not sure we have one or anybody implements one if we do, develops and implements policies aimed at business retention and recruitment programs, markets, promotes, and facilitates business attraction and retention efforts, including preparation of press releases, communicates the program strategy to diverse groups, seeks and applies for grants to enhance, promote, and support the plan, and ensures compliance of all activities with county goals and objectives, state and federal laws, and county policies and procedures. That is the definition of the position. I think it is very critical when we talk about future of this county and being able to have ongoing funds and enhance our funds, so we're not in a position that we are every year that I've been at a board member, and I think Leslie alluded to it, it's always been, in my time I'm on this board, cuts. I've never seen a budget that we weren't cutting, including this one. We're looking at either freezing or a 12% across the board. Many times it was I think the worst case, one year that I was on there was 14% that she alluded to, and Rebecca knows also. Most of the other years was 10%, a minimum of 10% across the board, plus cutting into some other budgets at that time in order to get a balanced budget that we're required by law to have. But this position, if funded by this board, and let me find it here for a moment. I thought I'd had it. Total compensation, total package would be $156,714, and that is included. That's why I asked earlier the CAO. That amount is included in his budget that is before us. So I am asking this board to go forward with this And we can put this thing together, recruit the right person, and see the benefits to this county and our constituents. And them not leaving to go to other counties to purchase certain items, and getting a robust economy here in this county. This person's job, as I defined it, and specifically, that is their job. They spend their entire time working towards this retention or recruiting businesses into this county and selling our county to them to relocate here in the proper positions, in the proper areas that they're zoned for, and helping them go through each department, whether it's public works, where it's building, planning, whatever they need to do, help them walk through to get where they need to get their business open here in this county or relocated here. So that's my pitch. And I was well received. I got to say, Judy was a little excited, and so was the CAO when I mentioned it to him. So I would hope that we could go forward with this.
Supervisor Tofinelli, I have comments on that. How would that intertwine with our Chamber of Commerce, seeing that they've finally got their, I have to be careful how I word this, seeing that they've hit the ground running and they're making good progress, would we be duplicating services, or would we be combining those services? And the second part of that question is there room for grant writing in there?
Absolutely. Part of the definition to which I spoke about was grant writing and obtaining grants,
Okay.
which would help in reduction in cost to us eventually on this funding for his position or her position, either way. And I don't think it would interfere any way with the Chamber of Commerce. This is a county activity. This is a county employee. Certainly can work in conjunction with the chamber, and we have actually the chamber president, VP with us, could speak on that. But certainly with that position that is funded there, and that's not a full-time position that they have. And that position is not, again, an employee of the county, and can work with conjunction with departments here to get businesses through the county system to get them up and running. So,
Supervisor Garamendi, comments?
Thank you. I don't think there'd be a conflict with the Chamber of Commerce. We don't have the job description in our packet or any description of duties except for the budget item. I do have concerns, this is the first time we've talked about it, is when it's sitting in front of us in the budget. I think in future, we have new budget ideas, we ought to bring them forward together. I would be supportive of this if it was focusing on grant writing exclusively. I think that's it's easier to measure return on our investment through a grant writer. We're paying $50,000, $60,000, $100,000 a year. We could say that person brought in $3 million new grants, $6 million of new grants. And oftentimes the grants that we get for economic development and other things can help fund that economic development person. And then we could have that. I've dealt a lot with economic development people up and down the valley in the private sector, and there are exceptions, but for the most part, I often feel like I'm running around with a real estate agent. And I think that's important, and that's an important part of locating a business, absolutely. But at a time that we are talking about 12% cuts, we really need to show what the ROI is, with our return on our investment, and maybe there's a metric that we could use, but certainly locating a business, bringing it here, setting up their shop, collecting sales tax, employment, all that is really 3 to 5 years before the county starts realizing those dollars. So while I'm not opposed to it, I think maybe if we shifted a little bit, we could get better measurement tools. And certainly I don't see any, I think it'd be a great partner for the chamber. I'd love to have a dozen of these guys, because I think they could do stuff, but I think we have to be disciplined at this point.
If we were in Rotary, you'd be fined 10 times.
The off button doesn't work. Next, it's gonna go out the window.
Well, I certainly understand what you're saying, Supervisor Garamendi. And again, the definition is here, and I didn't forward it to you because it would have been a Brown Act violation if I dispensed it forward. Obviously, if some of mention of it or this description could have been put in the budget packet in front, the tab. Obviously, it didn't make it in. So I can forward this to you, or I can have Diane forward it to all of you to look at. Obviously, we're not going to go until the 27th to adopt this budget. It'll give you time to look at it, think about it. But again, grant writing is in it, and that's always part of the definition of this position throughout, and it does compensate for their salary. So I understand where you're coming from. Exactly.
Supervisor Mills.
Thank you. I see the position of a person who responds to grants as a critical need in our county. I'm even thinking about our various fire organizations that spend enormous amounts of time just perusing. There are roughly 1,500 FEMA grant opportunities that are on the table right now. If you start looking at the broad list, it could be a full-time job. And then you couple that with the administrative requirements, of which we would be then, it's 8% or whatever it might be to handle that, to be sure that it's being handled properly. That would be a tremendous burden off of everybody to be able to have access to funds simply because we aren't in that mode of creating a priority for it. So this creates a priority. This gives us an opportunity to have an ombudsman that can be that liaison to, just like what the chamber is doing in many respects, but in many other ways, because it's a county position, it gives us additional opportunities that the chamber just can't fill those pieces. So it was one of those things I even talked about during the campaign of how important it was that we have somebody that can respond to grants. They're not grant writers, because that's the person who wrote the grant first in the first case, but they do respond to it with a proposal. And I'm thinking of even the Foothill Fire Safe Council and how many grants that they've responded to, and how many private organizations, homeowners associations even, in our county that have responded to grants and have gotten them. And so we need to build on that and build on the opportunities that are created there. I'm not saying we're going to get every one, but just to be able to have an access point and somebody who that is their focus. Right now, there is nobody in our system other than the Sheriff's Department that really is focused, that I think, to a great degree on dealing with this part of our revenue stream. And it is a very critical part of how successful. Barbara, I'm sorry, I forgot you too. You worked very hard on it as well. But this is just something I see as an opportunity, and it will more than pay for itself if it's done right. So thank you for the comment.
I have a comment, follow-up to that information. Tuolumne County uses Larry Cope and his staff very, very well. Has a great reputation and gets things done. If we are considering a program like this, we need to look 2 to 4 years down the road, that if it's successful, we're going to need to build on that, providing staff, facilities, things of that sort. So it's not just an immediate Band-Aid fix, if you will.
That's correct, absolutely correct.
And I am supportive of it. I know that attempts of economic development by the private sector in some committees have been unsuccessful for a variety of reasons. And I think that following the model, if you will, from Tuolumne County, and I don't want to push that too hard, but the bottom line is that's a successful program.
It is very successful.
We are going to be losing on the Mariposa, Calaveras County Economic Development, we are going to be losing the services of Larry Cope. It looks like in actually this month, due to the fact that Tuolumne and the city of Sonora want to use him exclusively. So success breeds success, and our loss because we don't have accessibility to Larry. But if we can develop our own, that's a feather in our cap.
And Amador County had a gentleman that started what you've seen over there, and they were he ended up being completely grant funded, and he he was completely no general fund whatsoever. And what you see over there was his work too. So, I think it's something that we're long lagging behind, and we definitely need here in Calaveras County. At least it's starting block here, and as you say, as it grows.
But let's give Supervisor Gurman
Yeah.
a chance, and the rest of us a chance to review
Yeah.
that in print, and I think that's something that we could look
I have
forward to.
one more thing. I do have a lot of experience in this at the University of California, both at Berkeley and UC Davis. I oversaw the Department of Corporate and Foundation Relations, which does this. And it was corporate and foundation relations. And what we learned, and we brought in about $200 million a year at UC Berkeley. And what we learned was it's really hard to find somebody who can do both. Because if you're spending your time researching grants, communicating with staff, filling out that, making sure that, it's a facilitator, making sure they've got the right paperwork, making sure they're following up. It's very much an internal focus with your eye outside. It's very much riding a desk. And the corporate side of things is very much on the road. You're out selling. And we actually, it was very rare that you could find somebody who could do both. So we always have to, when we set up the shop down at UC Merced, we said, okay, we have to do both. But, if we have to lead, where do we lead? And we found that we could seed the desk jockey could pay for the fuel and the travel guy, but it's tough. It's really hard to find a person who can do both. They exist. Larry's
Well,
a
they
good example.
exist, and Larry Coates is a good example, that's correct.
But, tough.
Okay, further comments on this? Madam Clerk, you have your light on.
If I could please ask you to speak into your microphones directly. We cannot pick you up on the video.
I'm sorry,
Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
my apologies.
1, 2.
Push-ups. Okay, next item of discussion. Do we have one?
You're
that
still
you
on, Gary.
would like to
Yeah,
address?
that's all I had at this point.
Supervisor Tofinelli?
That's all I had at this point.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Garamendi, anything further to discuss?
Well, I guess it depends on what we're going to do next. Are we going through each tab, or do you want just sort of what we found? Do you want each tab, or do you want just what we found? Or how would you like to approach this, Mr. Chair?
Well, I think we should start our review process. Who would like to go first on each tab if you want to present in that manner?
Well, Dennis has got the most tabs.
On this side of the room?
Wait.
Are you
Well,
sure? Are you sure you want to do
Ladies and
that?
gentlemen,
I'm not
I just want to take notice of Supervisor Mills' budget binder. I see we can save probably $15-20 just on postrums. He has a very
Those are
engaged-
expensive ones, too.
Yeah, a very engaged binder, so how about if we let Supervisor Mills go first?
Are we actually going to go through tab by tab, or
No,
are we just going to
because-
look for your recommendations?
Let's do this. Let's have it start at another side, and maybe many of the tabs that I have will be pulled off by the time we get here.
Yeah.
If I could also add to the unfortunate thing, and I had sent a note hoping that more department heads would be here at this point, because my hope is certainly if the board has questions, I'll try and answer to the best of my ability on certain departments, but without all of the department heads here to weigh in their input, it might be a research item that then comes back on the 27th when we do final budget.
Supervisor, I'm sorry, CO Lutz, seeing you made that announcement, and they're probably following us on the county internet, why don't we take a 10-minute break, give those folks a chance to respond, then we'll start. All right? We're breaking for 10 minutes, folks. Well, I can say. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your cooperation. I think we have departments represented now. And before we start, I'm going to make a request of the board. Maybe it might be better if we brought up the issues of concern instead of going line by line, of course.
I
That
agree
might be a better
totally.
way to be more effective. So at that right now, we'll start with Supervisor Tofinelli.
The only concern that I brought, I've mentioned, so I don't have any other concerns at this time. Going forward to the 27th, I will probably surmise some more concerns for the final budget, but at this time, my concerns I've spoken.
Okay. Thank you very much. Supervisor Garamendi? Any concerns? Sir, your mic.
Bring it up to your lips. Like this? All right. I have a couple items. First one, I think I have concerns regarding, I'm sorry guys, this is hard to flip around in this thing, but I have concerns regarding the allocation of the teeter funds. We have according to what I've been told, we have an unwritten agreement to spend a third of those teeter funds on the Visitors Bureau every year for Calaveras. And,
I apologize for interrupting.
Yes.
Do you mean teeter or transient
excuse me,
occupancy tax?
transient, TOT. Thank you very much.
Sorry to interrupt.
We have a agreement to do that, and I'd like this board to visit that, and whether, you know, at the time that we're cutting people internally and back our budgets internally, do we have enough to actually continue that, and what is the accountability for that? In this budget, we're spending, you know, well over $100,000 to the Visitors Bureau. They run according to their 2016 budget that's posted online, they're running about a $330,000 budget with $110,000 in reserves. I don't know if that's current, but that's what was posted. And I just wonder, in this time of restriction, if that's a good return and if that's a good investment, and then, you know, how do we measure what the outcomes are? How do we measure what our return on investment is for that investment that we're making in an outside organization? So I don't know whether the board wants to discuss that, but that was my first item.
We can discuss it now.
Great.
Okay. Do we have an answer for that?
So what would be your proposal?
My proposal would be to certainly hear a presentation by the Visitors Bureau before we continue to make that investment. I think we ought to have it as a fixed amount. Our TOT goes up and down. If we're going to make a contribution, I would propose that we make a fixed contribution that's in line with what their needs are.
We can certainly reach out, or if the CAO wants to reach out to them. What we did do in this 17-18 budget is, instead of the historical split it in a third, so a third goes to the CVB, a third went to the general fund, and then a third was allocated to the roads. I talked to CAO Lutz, and we decided to cap the CVB portion to the 15-16 allocation. So it won't be a third anymore, just because we did see that they have reserves. They did come forward and give us some portion of their funds back that we had given them. So we reduced it, so it's not going to be a third. So I think we capped it at 133 is what's in the 17-18 budget.
Well, that's a price of a full-time deputy. And we're talking about public safety as being our number one priority. So I would propose that we zero that out until we find out what we're getting in return exactly.
Okay, I have a comment, Ms. Callen. The original transient occupancy tax was voted on by the voters, and it was going to be designated funds to 3 different organizations, I understand. Am I incorrect on that?
It was to the general fund.
It went
And
to
then-
general fund and was dispersed?
And then the Board of Supervisors took an action, basically in a budget, and I have nothing other than the passage of the TOT originally. And so the discussions early on was that the Board of Supervisors wanted to give a third of the TOT to the Calaveras Visitors Bureau. They wanted to give a third to roads, and a third would stay with the general fund. And so that has just historically been what has happened year over year over year over year. There's
There
nothing.
was no public safety funds involved in that?
No,
Okay.
no, as far as I go back, no.
Then I agree and concur with you, Supervisor Garamendi. We have to revisit that, especially this budget period.
So
Yeah, I think, I agree. I think Supervisor Garamendi's got a good point that we just need to revisit that agreement and just take a look at whether or not that is what's working for us and whether we're getting the return we want to get and the value of it. I agree.
Okay. CEO, do you want me to reach out to the CBB, or did you want to?
I was going to say, I'll be happy to. I actually met with Lisa a couple weeks ago when they were giving us those funds, that check back for rebated funds. And they are very interested, and I actually made a suggestion that they needed to come to the board to provide a presentation of what services they're providing, the value that they bring back to the county. Obviously, the one third has been a handshake deal. When you look at the percentage that City of Angels gives them, I believe is significantly less, around 11-15%, somewhere in that range. And so I think having a policy decision on how much we would allocate to Visitors Bureau would be important, if any.
Maybe what we can do is we zero that out, and then they could come back and ask for the money. And we could see how that fits into our overall budget priorities.
Council, should the board make a decision, would it fit our timeline for final approval of this budget if we change policy to the designated funding of the TOT? Do we need just a board vote on that, or does it need to go through a process?
Well, at this point, the discussion is what the budget is going to look like, the recommendations to staff of any modifications to the recommended budget for staff to make, to bring forward on the 27th for adoption. Certainly that can be done, that direction can be made. Staff can reach out to the Visitors Bureau and let them know. It's my understanding that there is no written agreement, so there is nothing holding the county accountable to that set 3%. It's my understanding that or excuse me, a third of the TOT. So certainly if the direction is to zero that allocation out until some later date, that can be direction made to staff.
It can be done.
Certainly.
Okay.
That's a
Staff-
budgetary decision.
Yeah, I mean, our department heads come and ask for the money. So, okay.
Second issue, sir.
My next, I got lots of issues. We are currently sending $11,000 a year in this budget to White Pines Park. Maybe we can understand why we're sending $11,000. Tim?
Yes, and I appreciate you giving me a little heads up on asking this question so I could do some digging. We are in a 20-year lease with White Pines under Parks and Recreation to provide space there for public. The actual cost of that is $420 annually. Couldn't figure out the difference until I was able to get clarification. Staff were able to talk to former CAO to understand that we would bank those extra dollars as kind of a accounting of staff time being used to spend there. At this point, I feel like we're using the staff time anyway, and it's already accounted for within the general fund. If we reduced that to $420, which is the amount of the annual lease, that would clean it up and be an easy adjustment.
So with that information, I would propose that we reduce that amount to $420, what we owe them, and have a little bit clearer budget.
We can do that with the poll of the board? Or is that just your
Anybody?
proposal?
That's my
Do it?
proposal.
Okay, good. No objection? Objection. Okay.
My next item is, we already talked about the economic developer. We have over $1 million in this budget for, actually about 1.2 million for capital improvements. I'm pretty hesitant to allocate that kind of money without a plan. A lot of these items, ADA, HVAC, roofing, parking lot fix, there's no doubt that they need to happen. But what I don't want to do is put a bunch of money into HVAC system and fix things and then fix them again. And we're just doing the work twice. If we had that money and it was part of an overall build, I mean, there's no doubt about the roofs, and all these things. But I would like to see it part of a larger vision for what we're going to do, so we're not duplicating work in the future. And I'm wondering, what would be a general timeline on that, and how would that fit with our budget at this time? And some of these have been on last year's budget as well.
Well, actually, you hit on that point, and I was actually going to ask if the auditor might assist me in this particular conversation. I completely agree. None of those funds should be expended without a plan. We have, as far as I can tell, and this is where I'm asking the auditor for a little bit of background, typically where we've had those funds, we've gone to the top of that allocation without necessarily having a complete spending plan associated with those funds. And I don't know if you want to jump in on how we've decided. Usually if we have this amount left in that fund, we're going to budget the full amount so we have access to that appropriation, or?
So there really is no money in that fund. It's basically a pass-through to account for capital outlay for the county, not roads and not transit, not airport, but the rest of the government.
We do have the 2.6 sitting in the.
That's in certificates of participation.
Yes, the
And
CIP
so in
account.
terms of CIP, it's a budget that gets put through. Historically, your office has just decided what the priority was going to be. I have had frustrations with that because, as I have complained for the last 10 years, the parking lot is a little dark when employees leave who work after 5 o'clock in the winter. So, I had asked maybe a lighting plan or something. Yes, I completely agree there should be a plan. There shouldn't be just a unilateral decision on what is going to be spent out of CIP on any given year. So what happens is, based on what got budgeted, those funds would come from either certificates of participation, or they may come from another department, a transfer in. And so whatever gets expended in CIP gets funded right behind it at the same time. So there really isn't an accumulated balance of funds in CIP. There is money in certificates of participation, which is a fund. It's a separate fund that was that we are paying debt service on until 2036 or whatever it is. And if any of you recall, way back when, the certificates of participation was done in order to pay for the property where the jail, sheriff's administration, and the courts sit on. So that was the original intent of the certificates of participation. The remainder of the monies have sat there and have been used on lighting projects, pavement projects within the county, HVAC, ADA compliance projects, anything like that.
How much is in there?
It's about 2 million.
Yeah, it's about 2.6, I think, is
Yeah.
the remaining
I'd
balance.
have to look.
We're paying interest on that, so.
Well, we're earning interest on that balance. We have to pay debt service on the entire amount. So the
Right.
entire balance, the debt service, I'd have to go back and look, but I want to say it was like out of 7.6 million or 7.8 million, something like that.
And the history on that piece, when I did some digging and going back to the prior discussion earlier this morning about the first space plan, we'll call it, that never was, those funds were designated to be used for improvements in the administrative buildings here. The challenge we're running into is knowing roofing, HVAC, et cetera. We're trying to figure out what truly is going to be remaining after we do those deferred maintenance improvements.
So I would suggest that a plan does occur. It is one of my concerns that money has just been sitting there, and that was not the intent of going out and getting that debt. The intent was to purchase the land and to do the projects that were isolated in the originating documents. In the originating documents for the certificates of participation, it's capital. So in essence, the certificates of participation is almost kind of like it's kind of like a bonding instrument on leases. It's a lease.
It's a line of
lease,
credit.
Yeah. It's not a grant, it's like a bond. And so we are limited in terms of what we can use. So I have heard historically people have said, well, why would you spend the money on ADA compliance? Why wouldn't you use that money to pay for staff? You can't, because that's not the intent of the certificates of participation, so it would be a violation of that. If for some reason, you all said, well, we don't want to do any of it and we want to pay the debt off, that would be the other option. We could take the portion of the certificates of participation balance, pay the debt service off, and then we wouldn't have any more debt except for the balance that we still owe.
The 1.25 that we've got set aside here as capital, for our capital assets, is that coming out of the CIP?
That goes through CIP, all of that goes through CIP, but it could be a multitude of funding sources. It could be coming from, so how we kind of draw the line of what goes in CIP and what doesn't is if the Sheriff's Department was going to buy a vehicle, that vehicle will be funded as a capital equipment purchase in the Sheriff's budget. If through OES they were going to do like a large communications project, which is not just buying a piece of equipment, it actually has consulting dollars and potential, just a kind of a much wider breadth of a capital outlay, that wouldn't actually be in the OES budget. It would actually go through CIP, especially if it's a project that's going to cover multiple fiscal years. So that's how we're able to granulate what the capital outlay is going to be so that I can then report and enroll that capital investment.
Is there anything that, when we do our capital plan, in going out and visiting various departments in the county, some of them are in some horrible spaces, including the district attorney, amongst others that have got mold problems. We have health and safety issues. It would seem to me, as part of the capital plan, that we have I know Health and Human Services has already done this, but what rents that we pay. And I'd like this analysis to take a look at, will we save money if we did something different? We've got space. Is it less expensive for us to build a building and bring everybody home instead of paying those rents out and having those rents go to pay off the bond or whatever financing mechanism we come up with? I know that Amador County, when they built their building at the top of the market, they paid a lot. But I think they're paying less than 3% on their money. So I'd like to have that be part of the analysis. And I'm wondering if we took that type of approach, what is the absolute and that's going to take some time to come up with this plan. But for this budget where we're cutting everything, are there things that are life and safety that we have to do? What do we need to do and what do we want to do while we come up with that plan, and would that make any adjustments in the budget?
For clarification, are you referring to the capital improvements budget is what you're looking at right now?
That's correct.
Per what Rebecca's just indicated and verifying where it is, that is a actual general fund neutral position in terms of all of the dollars in there are coming in from designated funds, whether it be the COP
it could be coming from
funds.
COP. It could even be coming from Health and Human Services.
And I was
It could
gonna
be
say,
coming
some of it
from
is.
Homeland Security grant. It could be coming from Integrated Waste. If Integrated Waste was doing a large multi-year kind of more of a building improvement or infrastructure improvement project, it would not be paid out of Integrated Waste budget. It would be paid out of CIP and funded with Integrated Waste dollars. So it's really a capital outlay fund, but in essence it's a pass-through. So we aggregate our expenditures and we get the funding to come in. In terms, so I guess
If you look
it's
at
just kind of on a
page 2 of this, where it shows you your budget item detail reporting, it'll show you the specific budgets in there. We have HHSA being in there, building for
So it's not going to save to our general fund?
no.
Okay. Well, then let's take a look at how we can do things more efficiently, because this is, as Supervisor Mills said, that long-term strategy. Sometimes it's cheaper to build something new, or maybe it's not.
Right.
let's find that out.
And in terms of projects that have gone through the CIP that would be deemed general fund, what we've done is that money comes from TEETR. So TEETR will then be the funding source for those specific capital projects.
Because I was looking at some of the other budgets and Health and Human Services and other organizations, probation included, they have pretty hefty rents. And those are the equivalent of your anchor tenant.
They absolutely do. I mean,
Yeah.
Health and Human Services, I know, particularly their main administration building is, I know Kristen's nodding her head back there, is 43,000 a month, right?
Yeah, we could make a payment on a
huge
pretty
rent
good
payment.
sized note with that.
Yeah. So we did go through this exercise way back when the master plan, the first phase of the master plan was looked at, and some of the issues that we were running into is we were locked into those particular rental and lease agreements. But it's been, I don't know, 4 years since then, I don't know. But so it would be worthwhile to look at those. And I also know that some of those rent agreements have been renegotiated since we first looked at them.
Maybe the ones that have not been locked in, we make sure that we've got a way out. We don't sign 20-year leases.
Well, and/or the ones that we know are coming up expiring, because really, those types of building projects, you're talking a 2 to 3 year time horizon
Absolutely.
for being able to
Right.
do it. You anticipate, I have 2 years left on this lease, 3 years left, what's our plan?
Let's make sure we bake that in because we could save we may be able to save money, but only an analysis will tell us that for sure.
Supervisor, before you jump away from that, I want to add something to it.
I'd like to make a quick announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go to 4:30 today, and then we'll resume at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning if we're not finished. And I think we'll be resuming. Thank you. I'm sorry about that.
That's quite all right, thank you. And I had a sticky note on that one as well. I would like to see anything in this capital improvement program include some type of a timeline as to when we expect to start or complete that project, along with the costs. Even though the costs will not be direct impacts to our general fund, they are still costs. And I think we need to look at what those are, whether or not we are capable of doing a delivery. To simply have them on this list and never really undertake a project doesn't help us look very good. We want to be sure that we are capable of completing what's on that list at some reasonable timeline.
Can I ask for clarification on that point for direction before a final budget or a final recommended budget? Are you asking for timelines for every project in there before the June 27th, or are
No.
we? Okay, we're
No.
talking about this goes into our overall process improvement.
Into the
goals.
overall process, so we as a board understand, where are we going to fit this in? And if there is going to be any obligations, what are those obligations going to be, and to what level are we putting ourselves here in that funding stream? So thank you for your dissertation on that.
Yeah, and there's more. But wait, there's more. We have increased our insurance premiums in this budget. I would anticipate. I don't think we're getting any close. I would anticipate we have litigation if this board continues to move forward with cannabis, banning cannabis. Do we have sufficient coverage? I'm thinking in terms of Sacramento County and their recent court cases.
Tim and I have discussed that, and we feel that we have an adequate amount in insurance right now. It probably would not be a bad idea to have further discussions with county council and truly analyze that. But we had the discussion that we probably needed to analyze the liability insurance. The increase to the other insurance items, such as workers' comp, that increase is due to actually our workers' comp. We are in a pool, a CSAC EIA pool, and they actually changed the company that they're with, and so that the pool increased overall. So, and then we do have some large reserves sitting out there from past years. I did an analysis of the last couple of years. We're actually doing fairly well, but we have some large reserves from past years.
I just want, believe you do your job quite well. I just want to make sure that we've discussed that we need to be prepared
Yes.
in case it's a risk.
Yes, and we've had some in-depth conversations.
Ms. Hawkins, can you tell us, are we catastrophically insured at a certain point, or what's our deductibles on our liability? Do you have that information?
So right now, with our new company, our liability is $125,000. It went from $100,000 to $125,000.
That's our deductible.
Yes.
And we're insured 10 mil?
Yes, I believe so. And looking at them,
Yeah.
I was looking at all the different, it rolls to different levels.
I understand.
And there's a level of 5 million, and then I believe the next level is 10 million.
So basically, we're catastrophically insured. First 125,000 is on us.
Yes.
Okay.
And we even upped our cyber insurance this time.
And thank you, Ms. Hawkins. And council, you believe that we've got sufficient funds to defend ourselves?
As far as my office or as far as insurance?
As far as our office, I mean, we have to make sure we budget correctly. If we move forward with the ban, there'll be costs.
I have been considering that, and I did take that into consideration when preparing my budget, while also meeting the requests of the CAO's office as far as increasing. I didn't ask for increases, but I did take those things into consideration, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. We discussed in here, we should probably, one of the things I noticed was the archives, which near and dear to my heart in this county, are in administration. Have we considered moving those administratively to the clerk recorder who is in charge of all the documents?
And fortunately, she's in here to also speak to this. She and I did have this conversation. It was before, or it was in the middle of preparing this, so it wasn't structurally done, because I didn't want to add to her workload, but she was very excited by the idea of it. From my perspective, it makes great sense to move it. I think it just fell in administration, and somebody who really has a passion for preservation of archives would be a natural person to have it. I don't know if you want to speak to it at all. I thought I might as well ask her first before.
Before you moved it?
I don't know if it's necessary to speak to it, but I have talked to Shannon at Archives as well, and she is more than happy to move over to the clerk recorder's office, so.
Great. It seems like a great opportunity for grant writing as well. I mean, it's one of our great treasures.
I'll have to work on grant writing.
Just add it to the list of everything else we've got to do.
Thank you, Ms. Turner.
In this budget document, we moved OES from the sheriff's office to the administration office. We have not, as this board has not discussed that before. I don't have an opposition to it, but just, do we want to talk about that? So memorialize that you've all agreed or not?
Certainly, I didn't know if a supervisor wanted to comment first or not. This is a proposal that I did put forward. When I met with the sheriff to talk about his budget, I did discuss with him this idea. Again, knowing that there's been a lot of talk about this over the last year particularly. And the sheriff in general was not opposed to it being moved. Their concerns, one, there is an intermix of funds within how OES is administered. I'm familiar with that intermix from having overseen it in Tulare County. You do have a pot of money that is really reserved for fire, law enforcement, police, sheriff, and public health on the emergency preparedness side that would still continue to be allocated in the same way through the existing committee. That committee is mandated in statute anyway on how it's structured, how those projects are approved. So it wouldn't impact any of those grant funds that help pay for critical equipment for the sheriff's office, for the fire. What it would be doing is moving the administrative piece of OES requesting the two positions, basically an emergency services director that would be responsible for the planning on disaster preparedness, responsible for policies, the EOP, which is the Emergency Operations Plan, updating that, working with all of the community stakeholders, ensuring that we have adequate training for our department heads, for our disaster responders, and our community partners. And then it also requests a position of really the disaster recovery and response coordinator. That position is partially an accountant, partially a planner that really is looking at all of the disaster response, coordinating it, rather than our system now where it's bifurcated, where we have Public Works taking on a big chunk of that, my office taking on a chunk of that, no real strong coordination, and making sure that our invoicing is audit proof as possible. I say as audit proof as possible because when the feds come in, they will find something. Our goal is to minimize how much they take. So to me, I see that as a critical step in making sure that we're prepared for the next disaster through training, through coordination, and really beefing up our recovery piece. Recovery doesn't start after the incident. Recovery really does start before the incident on how you train people, how to document what you're collecting during the incident, and then the after incident pulling of all that information.
Thank you. Carrie?
Historically, OES has flip-flopped between administration and the sheriff's office. Every few years, it just, Clay Hawkins, I think, was the last one that was in admin office that was in there, that came out of the sheriff's office. So, I'm in favor of moving it over to admin, at least the strategical part of it into there, and leaving the rest in the sheriff's office.
I'm in complete and total support of this because I'm drowning in my office right now. I've taken over a huge recovery portion of OES, not only for Butte Fire, but now for Winter Storm. And it's in between herding cats and herding bees right now because it is so decentralized, the entire process. So we definitely need to get that moved where it needs to go and have some structure and some policy and framework surrounding that. If we don't do that, we can certainly get grants. We can certainly get public assistance grants and CDAA and FMAG and HMGP, but we'll be paying it back. And when we're sitting here talking about the budget and having a significant gap between our revenues and expenditures, add on audit disallowances, and it completely exacerbates that. And that's really where we're headed, because it's very hard for me to come in after the fact to try to kind of put Humpty Dumpty back together again when I didn't have anything to do with pushing them off the wall. So it's definitely something I'm in complete support of. We definitely need some help. My office is doing everything that we possibly can to kind of clean everything up after the fact and work with staff, but it's very, very hard. So really the benefit of having this go this direction is that you're putting everything together on the front end. You're getting everybody trained, everyone's on the same page, and we're all going in the same direction. And that really is not the case at the moment.
Thank you, Ms. Callan.
We have obviously we'll have a larger discussion about whether we freeze or cut and have that as a group later on.
Supervisor Cameron, I just wanted to add in about OES
please, thank you, sorry.
before we just jump forward. And that is that I fully support the thought, because 80% of the OES work is in recovery. It's not in the incident. And right now, when you have the administration piece of it, in essence being divvied out to everybody else, there is no oversight. That's what I spoke to earlier. And it is a critical piece of whether or not we're going to truly recover our funds, or we're going to be left with a severe shortfall because they aren't going to pay us back.
Right.
And so This is in essence the best place for recovery to be. When you get to the actual incident, you will have incident commanders. You will still have the boots on the ground work being done by the various agencies that will be responsible. But for the administrative piece of it, it is critical it be an administrative position and doing the work and being sure that the funding is properly accounted for each step of the way, which is where I think the OIG report spoke very critically of us for not being responsive to what they felt were the important aspects of funding. So you want to talk about where we could potentially be in a shortfall? What we're talking about with the rest of it is minuscule by comparison to what could happen to us with this. So this is, I think, we take this step, it will provide us, I think, a little more defensibility on the risks that could be potentially there, and give us a better shot at saying we're trying. And that's the best I can say to it.
I would agree.
Yeah.
If I could also add to that, when, after adoption of budget, I would like to come back to the board in early July with a presentation on some of those discussion points. One thing that we still need to iron out is the updating of the actual ordinance for the Office of Emergency Services. I know it's outdated. Well, the last time it was updated probably in the 90s when Brent Harrington reorganized OES.
I believe that it was in the 70s.
Might even have been, okay, might even have been back then, yeah. But we do need to look at that on the designation of responsibilities and how the board wants to see a disaster play out, because I think that's an important consideration of who is the director of the EOC, who's the second director behind that person in case that person is not available, and even a third level. Again, trying to make sure that we ensure consistency and everybody's on the same page, because I understand that was a significant concern during the Butte fire on who was in charge essentially, or who was the director for the EOC.
And to your point, repeated over and over again with FEMA, was that whole thing is that the board's position is one of declaring the Stafford Act, following through and assisting with the communication aspect. We are the figureheads. We are not the ones that are to be operationally involved. And we need to really understand, we need to separate ourselves from the actual day-to-day activities of the incident and realize that we don't play that role. And we don't need to be there. Okay?
I think we all learned a ton over the last couple of years, and here's my final point, which is I do have concerns about the little amount we are keeping in reserve, just because we do have things like FEMA out there. We've got these risks, and I don't know what we would do if suddenly they decided they weren't going to pay. And then, of course, part of the broader discussion is we're not taking into account, as directed by the board, and I think this is wise, we're not taking into account any Measure C taxes in this budget. Pointing out the obvious. But there you go. Those are my questions.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Garamendi?
I reserve the right for more.
You can reserve the right to come back anytime.
Come back anytime.
I'm going to defer my comments until our next meeting so I can give proper time to Supervisor Mills.
I mean, I only got till 4:30?
You only got to 4:30. We planned it
Stretch.
that way.
Okay.
Excuse me while I put that clock forward.
What's that? It was interesting because how I approached this budget, because I've been involved in building budgets for many years, is as I read what the CAO had to say, and then my very next step I did was flip it over and start from the back and work my way forward, because then you start to see the trending. When you start looking, always budgets are built by the big stuff first, and then you get the minutia, and you get so tired of looking at it, you don't look at the rest of it. You just let it go. So that's how I looked at this one. If you look at the green tab on capital assets, I think that we need to start thinking about a replacement schedule. And I'm not so certain that mileage is the driver. There are other factors. I ran a fairly large fleet, and I can tell you that I could have new vehicles, fairly new vehicles, that are bad actors. The maintenance was eating me alive. And the type of vehicle that you purchase for a specific use is a key factor as well. We found that inline sixes don't work in the hills of the Sierra Nevadas. We had to go to V8s because we were just constantly blowing head gaskets and other things. So I think understanding where our fleet is used, the type of fleet that we have, and then setting up a schedule that we can actually start to look at. Maybe in the sheriff's department, we say 5-year replacement. We're going to start working towards that, and we start setting money aside in every budget. So we're ensuring that we are replacing our fleet on a regular basis instead of waiting until something's broken and then coming to the board and saying, help, we need to fix it. So setting up some type of a plan, a master plan, and putting that in the budget, I think, is a key part of it. Going on to the administration office, when I look at A87 chargebacks, there's some words that come to mind here. It's called float state. I don't know if that makes any sense to anybody. This is factors contributing to significant revenue changes. But it says costs for providing specific administrative services are reimbursed 2 years in arrears through 887 chargebacks. So in essence, we're floating that money for that period of time. And just realize that expense is out there. Moving on. Non-departmental. I know that triple flip is complete. Was there any ERAF involved in that? Does anybody remember? Rebecca, do you know? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Was there any ERAF involved, or are we totally out of triple flip now?
We're totally out of triple flip now.
Okay, so there is no unknown sitting out there on that. Okay. So we look at 4061 excise tax, as you said, it's not in here. It would be like SB1, even though we have to account for it somewhere until it's a known number in budgeting. In budgeting, you don't oftentimes include unknowns and variables. So when we see that there is a number there that we can work with, I'm sure that the board would be willing to make some adjustments in the final budget or somewhere down the road. But again, remember that it takes sometimes as long as 6 months to a year for the money that you receive to where it actually becomes functional. So, if we're anticipating something, we need to know what that anticipation is so that we can start to take that into account.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding what you're asking, because initially we did have funds in the excise tax, roughly 5.5 million.
And it was,
I pulled that out of this to try and portray the budget without those revenues. Would you like that 5.5 put back in, I guess is what I'm trying to ask?
until it's unknown, and it's absolutely not a variable, it shouldn't be in here.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I got that for clarification.
Moving on community organizations, I understand all of the schedule here is transfers, University of California Cooperative Extension. There's a number of things in there, and that's really out of our control. One thing that we did miss in this is in the budget item detail, I think we need to include something for GSA costs. Because we are now a GSA, there may be some costs involved in that should be included. And I look at UMRA, which is 5323, community organizations UMRA, 11,000. Are we active in UMRA? Because I will tell you that in the past we haven't been. So Supervisor Garamendi, if you're active in it and involved in it, it has value. But knowing that we've been spending this money year over year and no one's been attending from the board, I just want to be sure that we understand that there has to be value returned. Going on to, this is the utilities, and we have utilities electrical is holding pretty much the same. This is 5504 line item electrical, but please understand that Utica Water and Power is already admitting negative power prices as high as $30 a megawatt hour, which means for every megawatt hour they generate, they actually pay the grid $30 for the privilege of putting it on the grid. So I do believe that CPPA is already discussing dropping that number for next year. So we want to know what that mill rate's going to be. and we can make an appropriate adjustment to it in our budgetary process here. Because I think that when you look at this as an overall from 15-16, which is the first line, to the second line, that's a 28% spread. To me, that's a little bit too high. I think we can probably, I don't know how you can justify it, and I would like to see what that justification is. Moving on to facilities. We've had 2 retired recently from facilities. And again, the position control list would be very helpful here. But when you look at 15-16 at 490,000 and the current recommended is 885, that's a pretty substantial shift. So I'm not, looking for an exact answer right now.
Well, I was going to say, part of that actually is reflecting the mid-year addition of an actual facilities manager to oversee and coordinate those efforts. That's really your big increase in that. The other side is, if you'll see a corresponding decrease in, we were contracting with, I'm drawing a blank on their name for sheriffs. Kitchell, thank you.
Yeah.
We were contracting services through Kitchell. That contract has ended, so now we actually had to add positions to cover the sheriff, and we have a corresponding savings to that Kitchell contract.
So that explains also 5201, which is buildings, maintenance of buildings and grounds being shifted the way it is as well.
Yes.
Okay. Moving on down, I have really no questions on archives and museums. I know that Supervisor Garamendi did, and I appreciate his input on that. I would go down to County Fire. Our in lieu water enhancement fee, we do have a designated fund for that?
Yes, we do.
And knowing what that distribution, is there eventually going to be a need for a distribution? Because if I remember correctly, because I helped spec the original water tenders for Calaveras County. Is there an intent then at some point to distribute that out to the various fire organizations, the districts that have those tenders, or?
So I think this
What
kind of
was the
goes back
plan?
to that capital plan that needs to happen, and that's part of it. There actually does need to be a plan for the accumulated dollars in there in order to, the intent of those funds was to purchase water tenders or fire suppression equipment for the fire districts. So the last time we did that was prior to me working for the county, and I started in 2006. So what we've been doing is, with the funds that were remaining in there, was paying off the debt service for the last round of water tenders that were purchased. And I think that final payment is going to happen in 17, 18 or something like that. So at that point, there does need to be a discussion on what the plan is in terms of using those funds and what the priorities are for the districts in order to buy that equipment.
Thank you, because I think we need to also look back at the original resolution that the board had put together at that time and see what their intent was, because those water tenders, in essence, what happened is they just gave the pink slips to every water district that got one and said, it's all yours now.
Well, not only
So-
that, we gave the water tenders and the pink slips, and then we agreed to continue to maintain them.
Yes. Yes, thank you very much. So I just see that as a need for a further discussion on that water enhancement fee if we're continuing to collect it.
Supervisor Mills?
Yes, sir.
Can I jump in?
Yeah,
A
absolutely.
quick one. Since we're going down the water, and I appreciate, I do too have stickies. One of the things on here is Central Calaveras Fire covers some of our county
I can explain
county
it.
responsible areas. Thanks. Why did we reduce their amount this year? Was that a reflection of property taxes, or? Why did
I
they
can
take a speak of that?
explain that.
Thanks.
What happened here is that at the time that County Fire disbanded, Vallecito was given to Murphy's Fire, and Burson was given over to eventually Central, to consolidate it. But what happened was Sheep Ranch, nobody wanted it.
Right.
And so Central took it.
Right.
And this is the reflection of the values that Central Fire gets from the Sheep Ranch agreement
So this is directly tied to the assessments? of
in the Sheep
property?
Ranch area. That's correct.
Okay.
Thank you for the question, though.
If I could add, though, I do think on the fire side, this really, outside of this budget process, we truly need to do a deliberate look at this. I know Central Calaveras Fire is concerned about the amount of funding they receive for the amount of work that they expend. And again, I think part of it's trying to find discretionary revenues to be able to offer up or other funds. I only bring that up as a point of when you're in crisis, you kind of put off those other difficult things that are sitting in the back burner. And I think right now the back burner pots are starting to also boil over. And this is probably one of those areas that we need to have a more in-depth look into overall how we're funding some of our fire agencies.
So if we complete the final budget after that point, then have the discussions. I don't see we're going to have the time between now and then to do anything about it, but I think
Definitely
it
not.
needs to be a discussion that we have with our various fire districts and what we're doing with this.
Right, I mean, it's hard not to have your heart feel for Central Fire after the Butte Fire and damage happened to their equipment and their firefighters. And the state did send us money, but as a controller educated me, AB 8 sort of makes it a disproportionate distribution. So I think it'd be a good conversation to have later, but I would like to really talk about that.
Moving on to information technologies. Thank you very much for putting in a Class 2 security analyst into this. The risk, I can't only imagine. But I think that IT also needs to be able to check off any time that we have a department requesting computers, laptops, servers, software, whatever. There needs to be a sanity check against IT to be sure that they're approving that, because they certainly don't want a conflict and they don't want to have any problems with it. So I think some kind of an IT standardization performance assessment might be in order after the budget is underway, so that they can truly give us some feedback of what the challenges are that they're repeating over and over again as they go forward. In GIS, I want to be sure that we're budgeting fair share with that, because there's a lot of different pieces of our organization that make use of that. So if we could be sure that, just like copying services or anything else, if they're taking a substantial piece of it, that there should be some kind of way to figure it into their budget for that use. Duplication services. I'm not certain if we had a bulk purchase agreement or how that works, but again, whenever we are doing multiple capital improvement purchases, and I look at this as saying there's 13 copiers, but we're going to deploy 9 in 2 budget cycles. That's pretty massive. I'd like to see this more staged in, and if we do this, then what's going to happen is at some point we're going to have to figure another 9 all of a sudden in possibly one budget year, and does that make sense? So if we look at staging in, I think it would help. Was there maintenance contracts on these purchases? Did we get a maintenance contract with them, or were they service as needed?
I do believe we usually purchase them with that maintenance agreement. Perfect. Thank you, Dean. Appreciate it.
Dean Friedley with IT. I'm here on behalf of Stan Moore at a family emergency. To address your first concern about the 9, that was pretty much a catch-up for the last years as far as getting caught up with the duplication fund. It is our intention to take a look at all those and keep up with it on an annual basis. And yes, each machine is purchased with a maintenance contract based off of usage, and that's added to the fund. And then that's supported through chargebacks to the departments that participate in the duplication fund.
Okay.
A question for IT. Are we making use of all of our electronic transmissions of documents, and is that seeing a reduction in our duplication costs?
Yes and no. It's going to depend on each department whether they're actually electronically transferring those or whether they're doing it with copiers. So the copiers pretty much are black and white and color, and do that. Yes, and each copier is in fact equipped to basically receive electronic fax transfers and electronic document transfers. It just depends on each department's operations. So that functionality is made available to them.
Good. That would be a cost savings. I know
Yeah.
it might be minimal, but at least we can get in the habit of doing that. Cut
Another-
down on trees and paper use and ink and copier life.
Yeah, and each of that, all the stuff besides paper is actually included in the maintenance agreement.
Okay.
So all the toner, all the maintenance and everything with each of those copiers is included in the maintenance agreement.
All right, thank you, sir.
And that's quite all right, thank you. And if we are looking at digitizing or scanning and spending more time scanning rather than building massive piles of paper, that might be to our advantage in the longer term as well. In the Butte Fire tab, I think I would refer to our auditor controller on this regarding the projections. Are those projections that are here fairly accurate, that we're figuring that there's going to be a revenue? 79,887.
Which Butte Fire section are you looking at?
This is, it's just listed as Butte Fire here. Grand total expenses.
It's the permanent work.
The permanent work.
Permanent work.
So the only permanent work that we have an obligated approval for is under public assistance, non-federal aid roads for 1.9 million. That's it.
Okay, that's what that is.
That's all there is. So until I get any other obligations or approvals, then until that happens, that's what that number will remain.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to Office of Emergency Services. We have a line item 5203, maintenance of communications. There was zero expended, and we're budgeting 94,000 this year.
This goes back to why I don't like this report. That zero expended is 6/30/16, so that was 15/16 zero expended, not the adopted budget for 2016-17.
Okay, so that's why that's probably the same thing on 5301, reimbursement county departments for services?
Yeah, the
Same situation.
I made, when I first started going through budgets, made that same mistake on a number of instances where I started to think, well, why the big jump? And then I realized that that the year end was actually really reflecting a year and a half ago, 2 years ago spending rather than last year's spending.
Thank you. On the auditor controller's request here, I think she makes a good point that we need to have some type of a review on these positions. It doesn't need to come right away before the end of this, before we adopt the full budget, but to actually have a review not only of that department, but for all. And how I say that is because if we have multiple people in the same position control list, but they have varied duties and varied responsibilities, there should be some parity between those. And I just would like to be sure that at some point in the next fiscal year, we start to look at that, as try to figure what that is. And I know you've been working, Ms. Hawkins, trying to figure out and making adjustments.
Right,
So-
we've been we've started working with the different departments. Of course, it doesn't go as fast as we would like it to. I have a limited number of staff, lots of different projects going on. But we have, in cases, even last year for budget, when there was requests for positions, we actually sat down and did an audit with the person in the position to see if they were truly doing the work that was turned into us that would justify the reclass, and then to see if what they were being suggested to be reclassed into was the proper position. And right now, not only are we, looking at where we have inequities through the county, we're looking at our titles. With all of the changes with SB3, where we're having to look at, in the next 2 years, the minimum wage is going to be bumping up against some of our positions. And so we're looking at all of our classifications, how, what they're doing. And we will be digging in to deeper conversations with the department heads, with the employees actually doing the work.
Yeah, I just want to ensure that there's parity across the board between the positions, what they're doing, and the responsibilities that they have
Exactly.
in those.
We want to make sure that what we are calling an office tech across the board, that's the work that they're doing. If they're not doing that work, then we need to reclass them to what properly fits them.
Thank you, and I need to acknowledge you've been reviewing all along since I've been here, so appreciate the effort that you put into that. But it is a continuing process, as you're well.
Yeah, it doesn't
like to
get,
wear.
it didn't break overnight. It's not going to get fixed overnight. We do understand, and as issues come up, we definitely dig into them and then we will eventually work across the board.
Thank you.
And this has been a fairly long-standing request by a number of our departments. I know the assessor has the same request on really evaluating kind of the overall structure, looking at where we have impacted classifications. Tuolumne County recently paid $150,000 to go in and have an independent firm do it. We felt our HR staff could commit themselves to actually doing it. It just does take time, and we have a process of working through that in addition to their other functions and duties. But again, rather than spend a huge chunk of general fund dollars to hire somebody to do it, we were going to work it in-house. It just means a little more time to get that completed.
No, I fully agree with the process. I just, by making a statement from the board, it's understanding that this is something that we need to do and figure out. And I think that they're doing that now. I just want to acknowledge that it's in process.
Right, and one of the things that I'm currently working on is updating our system so I can get better reports on analyzing all of the information on our employees. And I carefully discuss, with each employee that leaves with their exit interviews. I review those closely. So we're analyzing a lot of data. It's like I said, it's just a case of we know where a lot of our issues are. It's just getting all of the blocks moved in the right order.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
On the next two, which has, go ahead.
I have a question. Ms. Hawkins, regarding the budget memo, I believe it's authored from the Office of the Controller and Auditor. I need to point out one thing. I noticed that in local presses that the auditor was requesting a $25,000 raise, and that's inaccurate. It's the actual classifications of the 4 positions referenced in here. Combined. That is accurate, correct?
I want to be clear, this, it's part of where the budget memo process, also not my favorite, it seems like I repeat that a lot, this offers the department head an opportunity to basically discuss issues or concerns that they want. These were what the auditor was requesting, though none of these are actually in the budget submission. So I want to be clear on that piece, and it's not, the way that we operate the system, it's not really clear that that's the case. This was what the request was put in, essentially allowing that department head to go on the record of, this is what I would like, though that is not put in the budget.
I just wanted to point out that it was misrepresented in some periodicals that the individual auditor was requesting a $25,000 raise. That is not the case. I didn't think so, because I'd be going for your job. One more thing. Down the bottom, there's a statement requesting the board to approve minimum qualifications for the position of auditor and controller as allowed under law. What are those qualifications? Do we know?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again? I didn't.
On the bottom, it says, I'm also requesting the board approve minimum qualifications for the position of auditor controller as allowed by law? Do you know?
That's actually established under government code.
Okay.
And so years ago, my predecessor had actually brought to the Board of Supervisors to adopt minimum qualifications for Office of the Auditor Controller under that government code section. When that government code section changed, it rescinds your adoption. And so at this point, the Office of Auditor Controller has no minimum qualifications. You just have to be a registered voter. Technically right now. That's a little frightening to me because if I get hit by a boss or I win the lotto or whatever, the position of auditor controller today, and I would say many of our, probably every single department head that we have today is much different than the department heads that we used to have. The department heads that we used to have, whether they be elected or appointed, were generally from an administrative nature. They weren't necessarily in the day-to-day work of their department. That has changed, and it changed when we had reductions in staff because someone has to do the work. I have a daily workload. The assessor has a daily workload. The treasurer tax collector, the district attorney, we all have daily workloads. So to not have minimum qualifications for these types of positions is a little concerning to me because it means literally anyone with no background in accounting, no certification, no nothing, can run for Office of Auditor Controller, and there isn't staff to do the work. So it would be my recommendation that the board readopt the minimum qualifications for Office of Auditor Controller based on what's allowed under the government code.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarification.
Don't run away.
Yeah. I won't be applying for your job.
On our certificates of participation or our general obligation bonds, do you generally know what that debt service ratio is? I know it's different between the two.
Well, and because we just refinanced all of
Yeah.
them, I can't really answer that because I haven't really spent time looking at what it is now because we just refunded all of them.
Right.
So I'd have to look at that.
I remember sitting in the audience when that was going on, and I didn't hear it at that time either. So
Right.
if I could just get an idea what that number is.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. Pardon me?
What tab?
Oh, I'm up to treasurer tax collector.
Okay. You've taken all of them, okay.
Trying to keep up here. I noticed that we are now looking at purchasing a currency counterfeit machine as part of that budget.
And actually, that's a little outdated. Given the low cost of that machine, I suggested that the treasurer tax collector might consider just buying it now, and we actually already have that machine.
Thank you. Thank you.
Knowing how much cash we were collecting, I think it was critical to have it sooner rather than later.
Right. And I noticed that she speaks to the past 3 years, has seen a rise in TOT collections, 26%. We need to really understand that a lot of that might be Butte Fire related and Butte Fire carryover. So it's an inflated number in terms of the reality of what would be normal tourist activity. So we want to be sure that we don't continue to overinflate in future years, because that number should come back to some other number in terms of a trending. I just want to be sure that that's in it. And we're up to county council. I guess the question would be and I think that Supervisor Garamendi alluded to it earlier, is that you're comfortable with the variables that might be there, knowing what may occur in the next 12 calendar months, or do you feel that there needs to be some additional, maybe not right now, but maybe in a budget adjustment at some future point?
Well, certainly, if you are proposing to increase my budget, I wouldn't decline that. But at this point, I do feel comfortable with the numbers that have been presented to the board. Certainly, as things progress and as things potentially may change, there is the potential that I will need to come back, depending on the circumstances, depending on what the county faces right now. There are a lot of unknowns, but for where we stand right now with the knowns that I actually know about right now, I'm comfortable with the numbers presented.
Thank you. And looking at the law library, I know that it's not in an ADA compliant area. Having used it myself over the years, moving it to an online system would definitely have some long-term benefits for us as well because of the maintenance cost that we're incurring. So that's one of those that I think the CAO spoke to, is spend the money to do it because it will save you a lot of money if you get it done.
If I might add, Supervisor Mills, I've never, and I know I've spoken to both of you about this, I've never quite understood why this isn't located. I know that the DA's office has a library as well. Why are we not locating these at our public library so they could be accessible to the public as well, and we don't have to do these ADA upgrades? Can we just shift it over? And Supervisor Mills is correct. I imagine not many attorneys are cracking open books on a daily basis when you can Google it, find it online.
We actually do have a fairly decent amount of use and traffic in the law library. There is some desire to move to electronic. I believe that there are certain requirements for location, and that's why it is located where it is, and there's been some discussion of moving it up onto this level. Quite frankly, I am not as well versed in the law library budget since my assistant handles all of that. I can follow up with the actual location if it's something that we can look at moving to the public library versus on campus. I know that there were some restrictions on the location, though. The specifics of that I would have to look into and get back to you later today.
Thank you. I mean, it's about 26,000, so you speak to the librarian as well and see if it's a fit. If we could find an efficiency that still meets the needs, that'd be great.
Moving on to the public defender, I noted that the contract will expire June 30th of 2017. Is it the goal then to transition this position or the public defender to something else, or a new contract to be negotiated?
The public defender contract is actually through June of 2018. It's the conflict public defender contract that will be expiring at the end of this month. There is a provision that allows for rollover for month to month until we get a new contract in place. Negotiations have been underway between the court, the conflict public defender, and my office. So our hope is that we will have something before, a new extended contract before the board quickly.
But you'd stated in here that you wanted to transfer this to the admin department?
Yeah, that is something that my office has had discussions with the administration office for probably 3 or 4 years now. And the desire is to transition this budget over to administration because there are some circumstances where my office is opposing counsel to the public defender and the conflict public defender in certain cases. And so there's always been a level of discomfort of our office overseeing the budget and our office administering the contracts. So we have reached out to other jurisdictions to see how others have modified that. Some still have it in county council, but the majority is that it's been moved to the administration office, and so that's what we've been working towards. Our hope is that in this next fiscal year, we will be able to transition that fully, and so next year, this budget will actually be in administration's presentation.
Council, I have a question. When that operation is moved to administration, is there any checks and balances on the expenses submitted by a conflict public defenders such as expert witnesses, should that go to some type of review by council, or does that rest with the administration staff?
Well, we would still work with administration, but all of those costs are ultimately approved by the court.
Okay.
So it does, any invoice is accompanied by a court order.
We have checks and balances.
Yes.
I would say if you could transition it sooner to the admin office and then make the appropriate adjustments in the budget, if you feel more comfortable in doing that, to not delay it, if that is the best answer, simply waiting for a budget cycle point to make that change.
And I agree. Truthfully, when council submitted her budget memo, she gave me a heads up of the history of this and the desire. And I agree. From my perspective, it's really switching which department it sits under and letting myself get up to speed on what the contracts are, what the invoices I would expect, and begin reviewing those. We don't need to wait for budget since there's no real staff allocated time, administrative costs charged into this.
So do you get a percentage then for handling it?
No.
Yeah, 87 costs.
87,
Take
there
the
you go.
887s, there you go. Okay. I particularly, I do not enjoy your conclusion, however, it is there, and I appreciate you stating it. And that is, in particular, the number of alleged homicides prosecuted during the fiscal year has a significant impact on the budget. Hopefully that trend will not continue, and we won't, because you say here you have 3 active homicide cases?
As of the writing of the budget memo.
Is it different now?
I believe District Attorney Yook is here.
My office handles the homicides, so are you speaking about mention of that in the public defender's budget
Public
underneath county
defender's
council's
budget.
memo?
Right.
I did not read the memo. I'm not sure if she's just referring to numbers of open homicide cases that are going through court. They are not all public defender cases, so I don't know what the reference was without reading the memo.
But just to reference the costs involved in your office, since you're standing there, and the costs in the public defender's budget for those cases which you're prosecuting is pretty substantial.
Well, we don't parse them out by dollar
By
amount
cases,
of case. I
no.
have my staff,
I
and
understand that.
we work on the cases, and when cases are resolved, then we just work on the next case. So I can't attach a dollar amount to a particular case, and we have no control over what bills or what requests there would be to the court for indigent expenses with litigation. For instance, for an investigator, for a doctor, for whatever extraordinary expense they may have. Those requests are submitted ex parte. They go directly from the defense attorney to the court. The court approves or doesn't approve, and then the county gets the bill. And my office has nothing to do with that. I can't even peek or comment or anything that might be perceived as me trying to interfere with a defense attorney's exercise of their duty to zealously represent their clients. I can't say if those are actually public defender or public defender requests, or if those are coming from private attorneys who have decided that, maybe their client doesn't have funds, and so they're submitting to the court for those extraordinary expenses. Some of them could be coming from private attorneys who have private paying clients who want to receive this benefit from the court. So, and ultimately the county. I can't say. And so
Thank you.
I certainly can't be involved in any of the budget discussions on how much money is set aside for indigent defense or for private attorneys who wish to avail themselves of the opportunity to have their extraordinary expenses paid by the county.
Just so the board is aware that the costs are here, and to be aware what those might be in the future as well. So just to have a discussion about it, so we know where we're at.
Well, and I
Thank
have to say that there have been times in the past where defense attorneys have tried to leverage benefit for themselves in a case, saying, oh, you don't want to do this, you don't want to take this to trial because I'm going to cost the county a bunch of money. So I have heard that, and it has not worked. So it's not that I don't care about money, but how much defense attorneys are using that system to their benefit is not something that I involve myself in for a number of reasons.
No comment, I
And I would
understand.
just clarify, the budget doesn't line item numbers, and it didn't reference the DA's office in any way, shape, or form. It was just a general statement that when our office receives invoices and court orders for payment for expert witnesses, investigations, any kind of expert costs, that does ultimately cause a drain on this one, on the public defender account. That includes the public defender, the conflict public defender, and if it's private counsel that is appointed for indigent clients, then it would still, whether it's the panel, it would still fall under this budget. So that was all that it was that we have seen an increase in prosecuted cases, so our office has seen more invoices for expert witness costs.
Okay, thank you. Everybody okay? Good. Speaking to the next issue, which has to do with the clerk recorder and the board clerk specifically, should the board clerk possibly be budgeted under the supervisor's budget at some point? I'm just talking about, you're smiling over there. Here we go. Thoughts?
I don't particularly care where it's budgeted out of. It would make the clerk's budget look a lot nicer because the clerk's budget is so tiny and the clerk to the board's portion out of that's quite large. So it makes it look like our budget is offset. I don't care where it's placed. Historically, it's under clerk because it's the county clerk who's the ex officio clerk to the board. So technically, being the county clerk is why I'm the clerk to the board. So those duties are by law mine. So it's always been under clerk because it's not the board of supervisors' job to make sure the meetings are clerked. It's the county clerk's job to make sure the supervisors' meetings are clerked. So, but where she's paid out of, it doesn't matter to me. It makes my budget look better because I always feel like you guys are more willing to pass your own than mine. So,
Yeah, Ms. Turner, boy, they threw you right under the bus there, Diane.
Through all of us,
Is that established by a statute law somewhere? So we're in compliance with that, correct? So if we were to bring her back over to our side of the fence, we'd be breaking the law, right?
yes, you'd have to pass a county ordinance or some type of county law to make it
We tried.
the move.
Thank you, Ms. Turner.
You are where you are now, Diane.
That's it, you're stuck.
And Rebecca, I'm sorry, you sat down and, my question has to do with Muni Code. Your goal is to try to get all that transcribed into digital, or what is the plan there?
So currently, all the county ordinances, which we're required to keep permanent retention forever, are kept in paper books from when they were initially created. And part of what I incorporated in the board's budget, and I put it under the board's budget because it's specific to the resolutions and the ordinances, I'm doing similar projects in the clerk recorder's office with the books. But the ordinance books are falling apart currently. If you pick them up, I think Jack's been in to see them. They're deteriorating essentially, and we're required to keep them forever. And we have them filmed, however, the film's not legible. So if somebody wants to go back and find one of these ordinances, we pretty much had to look through the books to find anything, because if you go through the film, you can't tell what you're reading. So I would like to start the project of getting those ordinances in a digital format. The ordinance is a fairly small project because there's roughly 3,000 of them, so it should be an easy project to get them all in a digital format that is indexed. So we have them digitally to some extent, but they're not indexed, so finding a particular one is very difficult unless you know the specific number you're looking for. So everything, yes, is in Muni Code. However, if you want to go back and find the original ordinance for the older ones going back to when the county was initiated, it's very difficult. And the same goes for the resolutions. And the resolutions is even more difficult because there's not resolution books going all the way back to when the county was created. They're mixed with any business the county did. So if the county paid a claim, there's a resolution, there's a county claim, there's other acts of business, because the board of supervisors essentially did like every act of business went through the board of supervisors. So there's no just resolution books. And I found that resolution books don't start until roughly the 1950s. So everything from 1850 to 1950 is in kind of this mess of everything else. So finding it is very difficult, and very few of those books have indexes. So again, that project would be starting to get them in a digital format, preserving the original records, which were mandated to keep forever, and have them in a searchable format. That's my biggest concern, that we can find them. And I think it would save every department significant amount of time whenever they need to find something, if they could, and they didn't have to just, and eventually it seems like most people say, I'm just gonna assume it doesn't exist because we can't find it.
Yeah, Ms. Turner, is there a fee for doing that research? Is that something charged to any of our residents when they come into your office, or?
No, and the majority of people that need that research is county employees. So it kind of, unless a public member knows it exists and knows its location, we don't just randomly search things for them. So they're sent to look through it themselves, and I would assume most of the time they give up themselves as well.
Okay, thank you.
And just for the point, you're still on
Trying.
What's that?
you're still on microfiche to some degree?
We're significant, the majority of the records are on microfilm, yes, which is a problem in itself because the film is all,
It's aging.
it's aging, and it was in the 70s, the way to keep things forever. Well, the books are lasting longer than the film. So I don't know that that was the best solution.
The last time I used microfilm in a business was 1987, and we're still doing it, which is kind of amazing.
All of our records, even in the land vital records, are filmed through 95 up until recently. I'm doing a project right now. Everything 1980 will be digitally accessible. And then the vital records also, they're primarily film or books. And so I'm doing a project right now. We luckily have a designated fund for vital records. So I'm using my designated funds, the next budget, hopefully it gets approved, to put all the vital records in our current system in a digital format.
Will you be able to complete that with the budgetary item for next year?
I will be able to complete all of the births, and then the marriage and deaths is significantly less. I'm hoping in the following year we'll be able to finish that.
So you'll be able to budget for the following year for an additional amount to finish the work, and then it should be done?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay. We're halfway through. Do you want to have a break? We've had a lot of discussion around the sheriff's department, so I'll withhold on having a further discussion there. I understand. Mr. Mauer's here? Oh, thank you. Planning, I'm sorry. Do you feel, Mr. Mauer, that we'll be able to be pretty much completed with the general plan update in this budget cycle, or we'll be needing additional? I know we'll need additional funding for the community plans that still need to be worked on.
Yes, I hope so. The only caveat to that is if there is litigation that ensues after final adoption, then that could carry it on, but that's, haven't budgeted for that at all. But completion of the general plan, I hope will be done by, I hope to be done by the end of this calendar year, but I suspect given the timing of the EIR and the other activities going on, it would probably carry over to next year. But I would certainly hope it would be done within this budget year.
So are you anticipating litigation, or should we be anticipating?
I think with
Based
the
upon
general
the history?
plan, based upon the history of general plans in most of the foothill counties, yes, we should be anticipating that. Hopefully, we can have a supportable EIR that withstands litigation, but I think given the situation that we're in, we should expect potential litigation.
So it literally could be either in this budget cycle or the next one that would occur if it was going to occur.
It definitely would carry over into the next budget cycle. My experience in another county, the litigation took 3.5 years.
Okay, that was really my only question, is just
Good.
see where that was. In the building department, I know abandoned vehicle abatement program is part of the building department, and I understand that you're new, sir, so I don't mean to put you on the spot, but are we doing a fairly good job with the AVA compliance, or is this an area that's kind of left into the back?
I apologize, yes,
That's
I'm
quite all
new,
right.
and Todd is out this afternoon, so I could follow up and find out on that.
I would be more interested in how many AVA compliance we've done
Okay,
in the last calendar year, or the last budget year, so we can see whether or not what's here as a proposed would fit.
okay, I'll follow up with that.
It's just trying to figure that out. This might be another one of those, and this is in regards to nuisance abatement. There was, as you note, CO Lutz, and 4735 is a line item, nuisance abatement 0, and we're moving from a final budget item of $150,000 to a recommended for next year of $500,000. That's a substantial number. So is this one of those things where we're going to have some cost recovery here that we don't see at this point, or in what way is that going to affect our budget? And that might not be a question for now. It's just something I think needs to be discussed.
It does, and we will dig into that and provide some guidance. Look like the auditor might also have some comments.
As far as AVA, are you thinking that the revenue, the contribution from AVA has some sort of there's a correlation with the number of AVA?
Projects that were completed.
That's not the historical correlation. So historically, how AVA has been budgeted in the building department has just been to cover salaries and benefits. So it was, 50% of this person, it was 50% of that person, and a quarter of that person. It didn't correlate with
Actual number of,
No.
of vehicles abated, so to speak.
No, there's not like a unit, so however many vehicles were abated times some,
Some
some
calculated
factor
number.
equals X. No, it literally was, 100% of this person, half of this person, and a quarter of that person, and that's what it was. So my office has been kind of reluctant with doing some of these transfers because we found where maybe especially with cannabis, what we were finding was that the same person that was going to be funded 50% of AVA, they were being 100% funded with cannabis, and we said no. So we have been kind of policing those charges, so you will need to figure out that. And then as far as the nuisance abatement goes, in the budget, it was specifically to cannabis abatement, and equipment related to cannabis abatement is what that money was in the budget.
And I would add again, based on when this was submitted, and the timing for changing, you'll recall that we did bring to the board, either at the last meeting or the meeting prior, an agreement to, or at least a discussion at the agreement that we were now contracting to do abatement on some of these rather than buy equipment. So we're actually not purchasing the equipment that was requested through the cannabis funds here for that specific purpose.
So you'll make an adjustment if it's there?
Yes, in the final, it will be cleaned up and adjusted, but that was one of our structural changes when we started to look at why are we buying some of this equipment when instead we could be contracting with a firm to be utilizing that equipment, particularly if this is a limited program.
Thank you. Go ahead.
How much do you think you have to save us on this fund?
There's a line item there. There's a line item.
I'm just looking at it.
It was pretty significant that they're requesting, I think they're requesting 480,000
That's correct.
in
Yeah.
equipment purchases, which again would have heavily hit an already reduced amount on those cannabis funds. We're
So
real
they got moved out of the cannabis funds, and then the change that was made looked like it was, instead of coming from the cannabis regulatory funds, it was going to come from the nuisance abatement funds.
Okay, and that was an error in
Okay.
terms of it should have been just cleared
Just
out.
clear it out, okay.
Yeah.
So the thing with nuisance abatement is it's a one-to-one. So anytime you see a nuisance abatement expenditure, there's an offsetting nuisance abatement revenue. So removing expenses related to nuisance abatement
Doesn't
does
help
nothing for the general fund because it's funded with nuisance abatement. Nuisance abatement is, that's where teeter comes in. So the code violations that would come to the Board of Supervisors to go on the tax roll, okay? Those then get apportioned, so those liens get apportioned out to nuisance abatement. And they sit there. And the teeter basically fronts that money. At some point, if someone pays those code liens off, then teeter gets paid back, okay? So we're basically fronting the code liens, it accumulates money, they pull from nuisance abatement to offset associated expenditures.
And this is line item number 5701 for reference.
I'm going to, being this is my first budget, I get the privilege of asking any silly question I could think of. We're not, a lot of these departments are using cannabis funds, certainly building and sheriff's department. We've got that classified, so we're not spending more than we have, right? We're not double counting stuff, and I'm assuming we're not.
We do not know. So this is what the majority of our staff's time is being spent on at this point, is policing all of these transfers and determining if they are if they're consistent with the instructions and the direction and the policy that was given by council and the administrative office in terms of ensuring that those fees are being spent in accordance with Prop 26.
Right.
So we do a lot of rejections, and we do ensure that those expenditures are only reimbursed from one source. So whether it be cannabis, if it can't be cannabis, then they need to find some other funding source, or it's the general fund. If it's going to cause a problem to their budget, we tell them you need to go talk to the administrative office because it may turn into a draw on contingencies.
But everything's tied to the same budget number. So if we've got 1.7 million, we're only spending 1.7 million. Or we're only accounting for 1.7.
I would say I'm not entirely confident that 16-17, what was approved by the board, is in line with what actually got drawn down on. And that is something that my office is gonna have to go through and reconcile, because there wasn't a budget for cannabis. There was a budget for each department, right? So if I came forward, and I didn't, but if I had come forward and said, I'm going to do $25,000 of work, or I need equipment, I would have that equipment in my budget with an associated transfer in from the regulatory fee of $25,000. So it's pulling all those parts and pieces together. The problem is that as 16-17 went on, departments who initially told the administrative office that they needed equipment X, Y, and Z, and that mainly this has to do with staff is where it kind of gets a little squirrely. They would say they're going to use, they need a full-time whatever, or a certain level of extra hire or overtime or whatever it was. As time went on, it changed operationally for them. So the requests for expenditure were not in line with what was approved at budget. And so we've been trying to sit there and figure out if we are in alignment with what got approved for budget in each one of their respective budget units, or not. At this point, I'm mainly just focusing on whether it met the intent of the regulatory language, and if the expense can tie with that fee reimbursement, and trying to project where we're going to land as of June 30th and what the balance is going to be in that regulatory fund. You know, there was discussion yesterday that, you know, the sheriff's office wants to have a separate budget, and they want to have it pulled out of their budget. We did talk about that early on before anything came to the Board of Supervisors in terms of budget. It's definitely a way to go, but you have one person that has to manage that budget. And that is where departments back then did not agree, because they wanted to maintain the control in their respective budgets. And they did not want to give up that control to administration or my office or anyone else. So the whole idea of having one central budget for cannabis kind of flew out the window, because then you have to give up control. You have to give up expenditure control, right? You're giving it to whoever is going to be managing that budget. And we couldn't get a consensus on that. And that is why those budget dollars are in each respective budget unit. We do have an underlying project account underneath that I can see, and any department can see where they are at in terms of what they've spent. But it doesn't tie against a budget. Does that make sense? So
No,
we know what we've
it doesn't.
spent. We
I'm
know
sorry,
what we've
Ms. Keller.
spent. Okay, so
I'm totally
if
confused
you
right
run
now.
the report for the project,
Yeah.
you know you've spent 100,000. What you don't know is if the 100,000, how much of the budget you have left. Do you still have 15,000 of the budget, or are you negative 10 because you only had 90 to begin with? That's the part that we don't have a reporting for, because we didn't have a budget for cannabis. We had a budget line item for the sheriff, and we had a budget line item for county council, and we had one for the building department, and we had one for planning, and they're all embedded in everyone's budgets. We don't have a budget for cannabis.
Okay, Ms. Callen, I, with all due respect, how long have we known this problem existed?
Since before the budget was adopted. Last year. So, since 15...
Before the budget was adopted last year?
Yes.
How come we're just finding out about this now?
So these are discussions I've had with the prior administration all along, what my concerns were. And my hope was that they were keeping track of it. And as time went on, I realized they really weren't keeping track of it. So my office, has been kind of going behind and trying to figure out, are we in line? Okay, now Tim's here. Do we need to get on the same page to figure out that, you know, what's budgeted compared to where we're going to land is completely out of sorts, or are we going to come under? And so I kind of like, whew, we have salary savings and they didn't fill all the positions, so I feel a little better about it. But had all those positions been filled, it would have been a problem. It also concerned me some of the equipment purchases that were being made. They did come to the Board of Supervisors, but it didn't mean that they were in compliance with the regulatory requirements. So those are all things that we're having to kind of grapple with right now.
And whose ultimate responsibility was that? I'm not trying to point fingers, I'm trying to determine where the problem is and how we're going to fix it.
You.
It's our problem.
It's your problem.
Now.
Yeah.
You're aware of it?
I do have a question. Is this going to delay closing the books?
I'm hoping not. And we realized that it was looser than we had liked, and so I'm not the purchasing agent. I'm the accountant. So, my hope was that administration had, and departments had kind of resolved some of these issues beforehand. So before it gets purchased or before the person starts working, there's an understanding of the rules and the roles and the responsibilities. By the time it gets to me, it's a little late. right? So me trying to kind of unscramble the eggs, if you were, well, it's hard, I can do it, but it just takes time. So we did kind of catch it several months ago. We did pull county council in, I pulled administration in and said, I think we have a problem. This is not gonna go well if we continue down this path. So we have tightened up in my office for departments, which I'm sure I've not made many friends over the last several months because we are telling departments no. We are rejecting claims that are coming through. We are pushing back invoices. We are requiring them to pay for certain things out of their own budget and not against cannabis. And then we're going to have to go back before we close and correct some of these expenditures. I do believe that's what we're going to have to do to be in compliance. That's not going to be popular, but it is something that I think if we want to make sure that we maintain that compliance with Prop 26, and ultimately county council is who is going to be defending the, me and my actions and what the county is doing if we went sideways on this thing. I don't want to hire my own attorney, so I'm pretty much going to go with what county council tells me it needs to be. And so that's where we're at. So I would guess, and that's why I've been very clear with CAO Lutz, that I think we're going to finish relatively flat because I think that there are some expenditures that did get pulled against the cannabis fund that are going to have to be put back. I mean, that's just...
Yeah, my concern is the ones that you're kicking back because they don't conform, it's going into their budgets that they weren't accounting for. So the closing of the books, the general fund closing is going to escalate.
It could cause contingency issues, yes. So
Yeah.
it could cause a problem with closing the books, especially if it's very large pieces of equipment where we have to come back to the board in order for you to approve a capital expenditure somewhere else other than where it was, or a draw on contingencies because that money is no longer available in that budget.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
If I could also add to that piece, and I know this again is opening Pandora's box in terms of some of those challenges. It's where we have this fine balance, and being the purchasing agent causes that level of nervousness for me as well, where it's where we need to really look at, and going back to my presentation suggestion on stronger purchasing policies and practices, where we're relying less on credit cards, more on purchase orders, more on procurement and procurement authorization in advance rather than approval after the fact. Because as the auditors pointed out, when you buy something after the fact, it's seldom can you necessarily return it when you've been already using it, and it's a little late to make corrections, and it then puts a liability on the general fund rather than, again, you could say it goes back to the department, but it really does put the liability back on the general fund.
So I want to be perfectly clear. You inherited this problem when you took the position as CAO.
Yes.
I understand, Ms. Callan, your dilemma, but this problem needs to get corrected immediately.
Yeah, it does. And so we have been working with departments. We wanted to kind of let this week go by just to kind of figure out what some of the directions were going to be. We didn't want to hit departments of having to go back and reevaluate all of the expenditures and time that they have charged just yet. We wanted to kind of let this process go through a little bit and then have them go through and figure out what needs to be cleaned up. We're hoping that departments are going to be working with us, and my hope is that they will come to the table and they'll sit down with us and work this through. If they don't, then I may have to actively make those corrections without their blessing. But that's just something that we'll have to deal with and address when we get there.
Would you see to it that the board's advised your progress?
Yeah.
I know your plates are full, but this is a very serious problem. Unless we can get good numbers, we can't look at our budget, especially in this area. So if you could relate that to other department heads you're facing with, and CAO, Lutz will be our focal point, our contact point, but I think the board needs to be advised of what our progress is.
And relatively quickly.
Yep.
If I might, my core question is, I've got $1.7 million transferred over, 1.1 million from the sheriff, that's tagged back to cannabis. And again, you know all the numbers in there, and then I'm looking here at, roughly, a huge amount coming out of building also. I just want to make sure that we're not spending 2.5 million when we've only got 1.5 million.
Well, in the budget, that's exactly what's happening, and it's worse, it's 2.8 million, not 2.5. So when I looked at what is in the budget right now, that's actually in budget item detail in the CAO recommended version, building was taken out for that equipment. But even with that, if I add everything up, it's 2.8 million in requested expenditures,
Can you,
Directly tied to the cannabis,
directly tied to cannabis.
to the urgency
can
ordinance.
you send that
And also-
reconciliation
yeah.
to me?
Yes. And we're projecting about $1.4 million remaining in the cannabis fund. So
So
that
we
leaves
just
us
found another
short.
$1.2 million hole in the budget?
Well, it leaves us short of 1.4. And I think some of the hesitancy, and I know that County Council, Ethan had talked about this, is that it's kind of it's a if the board were to adopt some sort of modified ordinance, then the UO ends and a new fee could be generated at that time. And so that's a possibility. It's possible, there's a multitude of things that might happen. If a ban happens, well, you're not going to be spending 2.8 million. You're probably not going to be spending 1.4 either. So there's just a lot of ifs on what's going to happen over the next, short period of time. But at this point, there is there's transfers coming in from the Cannabis Regulatory Fund that are not going to be there. I mean, they're just not going to be there. And there is expenditures that are being requested of 2.8.
Right. I mean, I get that. If we go into
So
renew,
it's
there's
the
new fees
1.
coming in. But this budget is specifically drawn following the guidance of the majority of the board to ban. And so it's disciplined that way. So looking at that, did we just gain another $1 million in the hole?
Well, I mean, if you're going to ban, you remove all of your expenses and you remove all of your revenue.
Well, I mean, obviously, we're not going to be able to put in place a ban until the end of the summer. And we've got, as the sheriff pointed out, his expenses based upon the ban, we're doing the abatement program this summer. I assume it's the same here. And so, we will expend those funds. I'm just wondering, are we expending those funds and $1 million that we don't have?
Well, you'd be limited to whatever is left by June 30th.
I see what you.
And then the question with county council would be, can you continue to spend those funds after a ban has been put in place? And I believe the answer is no.
Right.
So if that was the case, even though you will have $1.4 million sitting there, you can't touch it. And so if you're going to continue to fund respective departments to do any abatement activities, that would come out of the general fund.
So if we were going to do any abatement of the illegal grows following a ban, we'd have to find new money to do that, obviously.
Yeah.
And
Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached 4:30. Would it be beneficial to continue this conversation at 9 o'clock in the morning? Or would you like to continue on this subject? I'm going to give you the option. No, I'm not going to give you the option. We're going to reconvene at 9 o'clock in the morning. Oh, we need a motion.
Motion to adjourn until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Moved by Supervisor Mills, second by Supervisor Tofinelli. Public comment? No public comment? Bring it back to the board for a vote. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed indicate by saying no. Hearing none, motion carries. Meeting adjourned or continued till tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock.
Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you very much for coming in, folks.